You are listening to Perplexity.
Listener discretion is advised. Born in Austria in 1889, Adolf Hitler served in the German army during World War I. He was incredibly open about being anti-Semite, blaming the Jews for the country's defeat in 1918. After the war, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazis. In 1923, he was imprisoned for treason after his role in the beer hall putsch. While he was in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, translating to My Struggle, in which he predicted a European war that would exterminate the Jewish race in Germany. He was obsessed with eugenics, speaking on the superiority of the, using air quotes, pure German race. When he was released from prison, he rose to power and was named Chancellor of Germany in the year of 1933. He became Germany's supreme ruler by the time it was 1934. And between 1933 and 1945, Adolf Hitler, the Austrian-born dictator, also known as one of the worst people to have ever existed, would orchestrate the genocide of 6 million Jewish people and some 5 million others, including Roma and Sinti peoples, LGBT, Black people, Soviet prisoners of war, non-Jewish Poles, German political opponents and dissenters, Jehovah's Witnesses, and disabled persons. And more than 1 million of the people that Hitler orchestrated the murder of were children. This has become known as the Holocaust, a Greek word transcribing to whole and burned, but Hitler called it the final solution. His hate and vitriol for so many groups came to fruition during World War II, resulting in killing centers, mass shooting operations, labor and concentration camps, torture, starvation, euthanasia, and generations of trauma. The wounds of the Holocaust, known in Hebrew as Shoah or catastrophe, were slow to heal. Survivors of camps found it nearly impossible to return home, and in many cases, they had to grieve the loss of their entire family. Many were denounced by their non-Jewish neighbors. As a result, the late 1940s would see an unprecedented number of refugees and displaced populations. And it is widely believed that on the evening of April 30th, 1945, nearing the end of World War II, Hitler and his mistress turned new wife, Eva Braun, committed suicide in their Berlin bunker, 30 feet underground. But not everyone believes this to be true. Some allege this was a massive cover-up for Hitler and his wife making it out of the country alive, going on to live full lives somewhere else. So today, I will be telling you the story of Adolf Hitler's mysterious death and the Hitler Conspiracies. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I am your host, Kaydra, and if you are new here, hello, welcome to the show. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me, so if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I would love it if you follow along, review, subscribe. And if you are a returning listener, hello, my friends, welcome back. I have a wild story for you guys today. I want to thank Richard for requesting this week's topic. And before we get into today's episode, I just very quickly want to let everybody know that I want you to save the date. Saturday, July 13th, 8 p.m. Central, I will be doing my very first virtual live show. I'm so excited. I have decided that I'm going to do it on YouTube Live. I told a couple people I was going to do it on Instagram, so I apologize for that. I'm going to post the link on Instagram for people, but it will be on YouTube Live, largely because streaming wise, it's going to be a lot easier, user friendly. I can then take the video and, upload it later. So that is what we will be doing. And I'm going to be doing a Q&A. I'm going to read listener stories, and I'm going to be doing giveaways. I'm going to do 3 giveaways throughout the show. So that is Saturday, July 13th, 8 p.m. Central. Mark your calendars. So what I need from you guys is your questions and your listener stories. I cover all things mysterious. I cover, true crime, UFOs, paranormal, what have you. So please, 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 I cannot emphasize this enough. I know it takes a while to type out a story, but even if you don't think your story is good, I promise I want it, because your stories are your experiences, and I promise it'll be great. Question-wise, I've gotten a couple questions like, what's your favorite cryptid and why? I got like a F, marry, kill one for different cryptids. That was pretty funny. But you can send me any questions, anything about me that you want to know, anything about the podcast you want to know. I am compiling all of those for the live show. As far as today's episode goes, trigger warning, content warning. If you couldn't tell from the intro, this is going to be a pretty heavy episode because Adolf Hitler sucks, and all of the sources that were used for today's episode will be down in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get into it. By the spring of the year of 1945, German leadership was dissolving. On April 22nd, 1945, the Soviet army was advancing on Berlin. It was clear that Germany had lost the war. Hitler spoke with SS physician Dr. Werner Haas, asking for advice on how he should end his life. Haas suggested the, quote, pistol and poison method. Take a cyanide capsule, then shoot himself in the head. Hitler announced to his aides that he would remain in his bunker until the very end. Just before his suicide, Hitler would marry Eva Braun with a small wedding party at 1 a.m. on April 29th, when she was 33 and Hitler was 56. Hitler had met Braun in 1929 when she was just 17 years old, and Hitler was 40. Yeah. Braun was employed as a saleswoman at the time in the shop of Heinrich Hoffmann. Hoffmann was Hitler's photographer and friend. Braun was also Hoffmann's assistant, basically, and she would model for him. Soon after this, Hitler began, quote-unquote, courting Braun, according to some of the sources I read, but I would call this grooming. And Braun actually attempted suicide twice in the earlier period of their relationship. I couldn't find a lot of information about this, but one of those times, Braun allegedly held a pistol to her chest. Some say that this was Braun's attempt to try to get Hitler's attention. By the time it was 1936, Braun was 24 years old and was moving in with Hitler. Interestingly, Hitler never allowed Braun to be seen with him in public, so a lot of people hadn't heard about her and didn't know about their relationship until the suicides in 1945. Braun became Hitler's longtime secret companion. She wouldn't be seen in public with him until 1 year before their deaths, 1944. She wasn't involved in his politics. It was like he was leading this double life. So, flashing forward to what we were talking about in the introduction of this episode, April 1945, when Hitler was hiding in that bunker in Berlin, preparing to accept his fate, Braun had gone there against his wishes. It seemed Hitler never wanted to get married, and knowing their fates were sealed, maybe he did this to make Eva Braun happy. So while they're in this bunker, Hitler would detail his last will and testament to his personal secretary, Tradul Jung. Also, I am sorry if I am butchering these names. I do not speak German. My bad if I'm saying these wrong. Trying my best. So in this last will and testament, he wanted his body to be cremated immediately after his death. He would also blame the war on, and this is classic Hitler, international Jewry, so Jewry, and its helpers. And he would also urge German leaders to follow the strict observance of racial laws and with merciless resistance against the universal poisoners of all peoples, the Jews. So he was a disgusting, hateful person till the very end. While Hitler's guests celebrated their wedding and drank champagne, he would continue to dictate his will, and then he would go to bed at around 4 a.m. Later that day, Hitler would hear the news of the fate of his former ally, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, had been murdered. Their bodies were strung up in the streets of Milan for all to see. Hitler knew that he would share this same fate, so it was time. Hitler would order his staff to prepare, and Hitler's SS bodyguards would destroy his personal documents. One of his doctors was then instructed, and this is horrible, to poison his dog, Blondie, his German shepherd, and poison Eva's dog, which was a spaniel. Both of the dogs were given cyanide capsules and died quickly. On the morning of April 30th, after having met with his generals, Hitler and Braun would eat their last meal, which consisted of a lunch of spaghetti, cabbage and raisin salad. And then Braun would put on her husband's favorite dress, and at around 2:30, they entered Hitler's study. They sat on the sofa together, and we don't really know what happened at this point, but an hour passed. Then there were reports of gunshots being heard from the study. Several doctors opened the door to find the couple's corpses. Just 1 week later, Germany would formally surrender, and World War II would end on May 8th, 1945. When Hitler and Braun would be found in the study area of their Berlin bunker, Braun would be seen on the sofa, her head resting on Hitler's left shoulder. She appeared dead with no marks of violence of any kind on her body. Her cause of death was determined to be cyanide poisoning, presumably having taken a cyanide capsule like their dog Blondie. The sofa was stained with blood. Hitler was found with his lower jaw slightly open, and it was clear he had shot himself in the mouth. Drops of blood spatter were present on both of his temples, and it appeared the veins in his head had ruptured from the blanks of his pistol. The pistol was found at his feet. After several officers and the leader of the Hitler Youth, Arthur Axmann, examined the bodies for about 10 minutes, they were both removed, taken to above ground to the garden behind Reich Chancellery, covered in petrol, and immediately burned. Although the bodies did not burn entirely. The remains were then quickly buried in a shallow bomb crater. So, there was no autopsy of any kind. They were burned, gotten rid of quickly. So it's presumed that they both committed suicide. The cause of death for Eva Braun was cyanide poisoning, taking a capsule, and the cause of death for Hitler being a gunshot wound with a pistol to the mouth and face. 2 days after the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun were buried in this shallow bomb crater, the Soviet army would find them, and they would consult with experts to identify the remains. After a consultation with dental records, it would be determined that these were the remains of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. The remains were then quickly buried. But they would be exhumed several times later for some reason, for further investigation. In the end, according to some reports, they would be left in an unmarked grave in an undisclosed location. But others say that the remains were later destroyed in April of 1970 by the KGB, with only 2 fragments of Hitler's body, a jawbone, and the skull being preserved. 11 years would go by before Germany would officially declare Hitler to be dead, along with an official conclusion from the Western powers saying the same thing. Most historians accept this timeline, but some are doubtful. This is largely because of a campaign of supposed disinformation that came soon after 1945 that suggested Hitler had survived and escaped from Berlin, fleeing the country. In June, the Soviets would announce Hitler's remains had not been found and he was probably still alive. In fact, when the alleged suicide first occurred, President Harry Truman verbalized his doubts about Hitler's death. The narrative that Hitler did not commit suicide and instead escaped was first presented publicly by Marshal Georgy Zhukov at a press conference on June 9, 1945, under the orders of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. That same month, Americans were polled on whether or not they believed Hitler was still alive, and a shocking 68% of Americans in this poll believed Hitler to still be living. President Truman would speak to Joseph Stalin at the Potsdam Conference, asking him to confirm Hitler's death. But instead, Joseph Stalin would reply, quote, "No, he's not dead." He would then go on to say he was either living in Spain or Argentina. Photos of Hitler's body would also begin circulating, but the photos were later said to be fake propaganda devices fabricated by the Soviets' Red Army. In July 1945, British newspapers would say the charred body of Hitler was a, quote, "very poor double," end quote. American newspapers would also repeat these same quotes, and they would parrot the Russian garrison commandant of Berlin, saying Hitler was hiding out somewhere in Europe. A Russian newspaper, Izvestia, then ran a report that Hitler and Eva Braun were both alive and well, living in a moated castle in Westphalia. This implied complicity on the part of the British. The report was followed by one in August, in which an American lawyer would write to Hoover and the FBI, claiming that Hitler was living under an alias, Gerhard Weithaupt, in a house belonging to Frieda Hoff in Innsbruck. The lawyer also claimed Hitler's doctor, Dr. Alfred Jodl, was with them. And interestingly enough, there was another account that also placed Hitler at Innsbruck. The informant was also a lawyer. Another report came from a German doctor, Karl-Heinz Spaeth. Spaeth claimed that he had treated Hitler for injuries on the 1st of May, 1945, at his Berlin casualty clearing station. According to Spaeth, Hitler had been wounded at a tank barricade while he was fighting around the Kustrin area of the city. In his sworn deposition, he would say, quote, "Hitler was lowered to the floor. A shell fragment had pierced the uniform, went through his chest, and entered the lungs on both sides. It was no use to do anything. I took a few first aid bandages and bandaged him. During this time, Hitler groaned continually. He was not fully conscious. To relieve his pain, I went back to the collecting station to get some morphine and gave him a double-strength injection." The general opinion was that Hitler would die. I examined his pulse and respiration and found that after about 3 minutes, he had stopped breathing. The heartbeats continued for about 3 minutes and then ceased. After I had pronounced the Führer dead, which is a German term meaning leader, and again, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, he had informed the SS leaders of this fact and was released and went back to his work. Shortly after all of this, Spaeth said that the surviving SS leaders then went on to blow the body into the air. So they basically exploded Hitler into smithereens with 2 3-kilo charges of high explosives. So it was probably extremely confusing for people all around the world during this time period to know what the hell was going on, because there were people saying Hitler was in Spain, that he was in Argentina, that he was in Europe, that he had died in his bunker, that he had died like a week later in this fight and then was exploded into smithereens. So it's just extremely strange. Why are there so many stories about this? And why are they so conflicting? Later that same year, Hitler's last will and testament and his marriage contract to Eva Braun would be recovered. The FBI would later examine the documents, and they confirmed their authenticity. In 1946, an American miner and Baptist preacher named William Henry Johnson would send out a series of letters under the pen name Fourier No. 1, claiming to be the living Hitler and stating he had escaped with Braun to Kentucky. He claimed that tunnels were being dug all the way to D.C., so that he could engage with the armies, nuclear bombs, and invisible spaceships that would take over the world. Johnson even managed to raise 15 grand, which would be over 140 grand in today's money, promising incentives to his supporters. But in mid-1956, William Henry Johnson would be caught for fraud. He was writing these letters pretending to be Hitler, and he would be arrested. In April of 1947, 45% of Americans that were polled would say they still believed Hitler to be alive. In March of 1948, newspapers worldwide reported former German Lieutenant Arthur F. Mackensen had claimed on May 5, 1945, he, Hitler, Braun, and Hitler's secretary, a man named Martin Bormann, had all escaped the bunker in tanks. They then flew from Tempelhof Airport to Denmark, where Hitler would give a speech. After this, Hitler and Braun allegedly flew to the coast, and in May of 1948, an Italian magazine would write a double of Hitler could have been cremated, allowing him to have fled by submarine to Argentina. In 1953, Dwight Eisenhower would become U.S. president. He would go on to publicly say, quote, "We have been unable to unearth one bit of tangible evidence of Hitler's death. Many people believe he escaped from Berlin." End quote. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy would make similar statements in mid-1945. So did Hitler want his remains to be quickly cremated and disposed of because he didn't want anybody touching him, looking at him? Or could some of these reports have been true? Did he place a double there so that he could get away? Or was this all just a campaign of disinformation, and then this just turned into a media circus, a gossip train? Everybody has their own theories. It's very confusing and strange. From the 50s to the early 70s, the National Police Gazette, an American magazine, would go on to run many stories where they would claim that Hitler was alive. The tabloid-style writing would allege that Hitler had fled to Antarctica or South America. U.S. intelligence officer William F. Heimlich would write for this same magazine, claiming that the blood found on Hitler's sofa did not match his blood type, though it was confirmed to be that of a male. So it wasn't possible that this was Eva Braun's blood. About 10 years after Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler's alleged suicides, a declassified CIA document would be found. It was dated for October 3rd, 1955, and it was from a former German SS trooper named Philipp Citroën, and he would claim that Hitler had left for Colombia and then for Argentina around January 1955, and that he was still alive. With this document was an alleged photograph of Citroën and Hitler. On the back of the photo, it was written Adolf Hitler, and it was dated for the year 1954. The FBI and the CIA, despite their thorough investigation, supposedly did not find anything to confirm if Hitler was alive or dead. In the years since, two English writers, Gerard Williams and Simon Dunstan, have theorized that Hitler and Braun fled to South America on April 27, 1945, escaping from the bunker via a secret tunnel. They were then flown to Denmark, then Spain, where a plane was provided by General Franco, allowing them to get to the Canary Islands. Some have also theorized that Hitler and Braun were accompanied by Braun's brother-in-law, Hermann Fegelein, to a Junkers 52 transport aircraft. They have also said that this aircraft was piloted by Captain Peter Baumgart. Once they reached the Canary Islands, they took a submarine to Argentina and the small port of Necochea, 300 miles south of Buenos Aires. Then he would live out his final years in Argentina, having 2 daughters with Braun before dying on February 13, 1962. In 1968, a Soviet journalist named Lev Bezminsky released a book titled The Death of Adolf Hitler. In this book, he would include a purported Soviet autopsy report that had concluded Hitler's cause of death was cyanide poisoning. But according to the report, there had been no dissection of internal organs, or at least it wasn't documented. And also, I want to point out the obvious here, if the cause of death was cyanide poisoning, was that before or after he shot himself in the face? Strange. I mean, it's possible. It's possible he could have, taken the cyanide, shot himself, and they're just saying, that the cyanide was more fatal, or that the gunshot didn't kill him, but the cyanide did. I don't know. But I think it's pretty unlikely that he would have shot himself and then taken the cyanide after. Either way, again, this is just all very strange. And the organs were never examined. So how are you confirming that that's the cause of death? This was the first time that Hitler's alleged autopsy report had been made public as well. So why did it take over 20 years for this to be public? According to Bezminsky, this was because he thought there could be a case that someone might try to slip into the role of the Führer, again meaning leader, and this would mean that the reason it took so long for this information to come out is because they weren't sure if someone was going to come back and claim to be Hitler or take his place. Is that not insane? Bezminsky, though, would later admit that he wrote the book acting as a, quote, typical party propagandist, and the book's claims have been widely rejected by Western historians. So it's like he made all these crazy claims that would break this thing wide open, and then he kind of backpedaled and said it was just propaganda. So flashing more to present day, in 1995, a man named Hugh Thomas disputed the dental remains that belonged to Hitler in his book, speculating that Hitler died in the bunker after being strangled by his valet, Heinz Linge, though he later admitted there was no evidence to support this theory. According to a book that came out in 2011, Grey Wolf, Escape of Adolf Hitler, authors Dunstan and Williams would claim a number of boats took the Nazis and Nazi loot to Argentina, where they were supported by Juan Perón, future president. Perón had been receiving money from the Nazis allegedly for some time, and Hitler would allegedly arrive in Argentina, then moved around and ended up close to the Chilean border. Braun supposedly left Hitler around 1954, moving on with her life to Neuquén with their daughter Ursula. Hitler then allegedly died in February 1962. In 2014, a theory was published in Simone Renee Guerreiro Dias's book, Hitler in Brazil, His Life and Death. Dias would argue that Hitler had escaped to South America in 1945 and would remain in Brazil until his death in 1984 at the age of 95. She claims that Hitler settled in a small Brazilian town known as Nossa Senhora do Livramento, going by the name Adolf Leipzig. He was known by locals as the Old German. Dias's book also suggested that Hitler developed a relationship with a local black woman named Kaydra, which would be pretty insane considering what Hitler did to black people during the Holocaust, and to anyone that didn't look like him for that matter. A grainy picture of this couple also exists, but it was never determined if this was Adolf Hitler and Kaydra. So it's possible these are just people who look like them. And again, it would be pretty insane knowing everything we know about Adolf Hitler for him to have ended up with a black woman. So let's just put on our tinfoil hats for a second, take a breather, process all the insane information I just told you. And let's say that this is possible. Let's say that Adolf Hitler faked his death. He fled the country. Maybe he took Eva with him. But what about the bodies found in the bunker and the dental records? So, according to some, these were body doubles dressed in Hitler and Braun's clothes. And arguably, one of the most damning facts that could contribute to this argument, this conspiracy that Hitler faked his death, has to do with the skull that was found and the burned remnants of the remains in that shallow bomb crater in the garden. Because remember, the only two remains that were still intact were Hitler's jawbone and Hitler's skull, allegedly. So when the remains were examined, the dental records, had originally confirmed that this was Hitler and Braun. But in 2009, it was discovered that the skull that was believed to be Hitler's all this time was not his. And it wasn't Eva Braun's either. The skull, featuring a bullet hole in the temple, actually belonged to a woman less than 40 years old. The skull had been stored for decades in the Russian state archives in Moscow until 1993. In 2009, an archaeologist and bone specialist named Nick Bellantoni would go take a look for himself. DNA was collected from the skull and was tested at the University of Connecticut. The results would show it was not Hitler's DNA, and it was not believed to be Eva Braun's DNA either, as it was reported that she had died from cyanide poisoning and that her body showed no signs of trauma. And this skull has a bullet hole in it. The remains of what were believed to be Hitler's jaw have been examined by very few people, and this is also part of why it's so hard to know whose remains these are or confirm that it's Hitler and Eva Braun's, because there's so little remains left. They burned them right away. In 2017, French forensic pathologist Philippe Charlier confirmed teeth on one of the jawbones was in perfect agreement with an X-ray taken of Hitler in 1944. The results were reported in the European Journal of Internal Medicine in May of 2018. Charlier would later say, "There's no possible doubt our study proves that Hitler died in 1945 in Berlin." But it's also not confirmed where this jawbone was taken and stored. Is it possible that these remains were purposefully hidden? Some people believe the jaw was preserved in the Russian secret police headquarters in Moscow, but it's all very secretive. And so few people have looked at it. So, of course, that's going to cause some confusion and a lot of conspiracy theories. On the History Channel, there was also a series called Hunting Hitler, and investigators would cite declassified documents, and they interviewed witnesses that allegedly indicated Hitler had escaped from Germany and was traveling to South America by boat. He and other Nazis then plotted a Fourth Reich. The series was later praised in the National Police Gazette, which is, again, a tabloid magazine, but still interesting. And the National Police Gazette would also call on Russia to allow Hitler's jawbone remains and DNA to be retested. So have there been, throughout all of these crazy stories, any sightings of Hitler? Why, yes, of course. There's been an insane amount, as is common with a lot of these stories. So I'm going to get into some of them, not all, because there's just way too many. Among what is believed to be one of the first sightings, it was reported that Hitler had been living as a hermit in a cave near Lake Garda, which is in northern Italy. And there was another report that he was living as a shepherd in the Swiss Alps. There was a third report that he was I don't know how to say this, I'm sorry, a crooper at a casino. I probably should have looked up what this is. Krupa. A person in charge of a gaming table. Okay, like a blackjack dealer. So this was in Evian, and someone else saw him in Grenoble, St. Gallen, and even off the Irish coast. So he has been allegedly sighted, or a doppelganger of his has been sighted all over the world. In late September 1946, Hitler was also spotted in Spain, where he was leading a wolf pack of U-boats, which are submarines. He was said to be suffering badly from seasickness. Others reported he was living on a farm at La Falda in Argentina after getting plastic surgery on a boat. So this is another one of the conspiracies, is that he fled the country and then he got plastic surgery to change his appearance and was living under different pseudonyms and false names. Just before Christmas in 1946, the U.S. Embassy in Stockholm would receive an anonymous letter that was addressed to the chief of the American zone. And the letter would read, "If you look at Bawarska Mountains, you will find a long cave, about 466 meters, or maybe even longer, with doors, well camouflaged. Hitler has here a room 30 by 30 meters with electrical stoves, one big, one small. There is food there, cans of all kinds for several years ahead, and lots of money of all kinds of currencies. There's also a pipe from the top of the mountain in which food can be dropped down. Those who bring food there are called ravens. Those who built in this mountain have been killed long ago, so it would not be discovered. When you have found it, I demand 1/6 of what is there and a jeep and a tractor. You will know my name when you have found him." And on the reverse, it was written, "They have stolen horses and cows, hay, and so on. They have plenty of ammunition and guns. A Swede, who was a sixth sense, is with them." So I guess they're talking about like a Swedish spy that was helping them. "He tells them all, 'Find these gentlemen. What will be done soon.'" End quote. There was also a report in 1946 that placed Hitler at a coffee shop in Amsterdam, and the writer of this report commented on Hitler's strange appearance, saying he had a very long body and long arms. And he also claimed that Hitler had a direct link with the Gestapo and was trying to kill the writer. So the writer was basically saying, here's the information I have, but you guys have to do something quickly because I'm in danger. There was another report that replaced Hitler in Zurich, saying that he aged dreadfully and that his hair had turned white, his body was bent forward, and he was taking very short steps. He had some sort of a lung infection. He was coughing all the time. and he was often wearing a dark suit and a hat. One American GI reported seeing Hitler, Eva Braun, and her sister Gretel in Bernheim in the house where he collected his laundry. This man had to be Hitler, according to this person, because he flew into a rage whenever the V1 weapon was mentioned. And he also said that this man exhibited great sentiment over the photograph of a dog, which seemed to closely resemble Blondie, Hitler's German Shepherd dog that had died from cyanide poisoning. FBI documents that were declassified by the 1998 Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act also documented a number of sightings in Europe, South America, and the US. But, as always, despite all of these sightings, photographs, etc., nothing has been verified. So it is, of course, a continued mystery and unclear as to what happened here. But let us not forget, Nazi Germany's committed mass murder on an unprecedented scale that left Europe forever changed. Hitler orchestrated the mass genocide of 6 million people, all in the name of hate. It's pretty infuriating to imagine the possibility of Hitler cowering in a bunker, fearing being strung up in the streets, and killing himself off after what he did to so many. So, did he die? Most people would say yes. Or, did he flee? And why do so many people believe that Hitler faked his death? We may never know. But whatever the case, the story of Hitler's death is certainly perplexing. So that, everybody, is the insane story of Hitler's mysterious death and the Hitler Conspiracies. I want to once again thank Richard for requesting this week's topic. And if you have a request, you can always send that in to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. I do listener requests all the time, so I would love to get yours. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it so much if you left a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, or hit the subscribe button. Those are great ways to support the show. There are also other support links in the episode description. If you really like the show and you really want to support and you want exclusive bonus content, go check out the Patreon. I have over 20 episodes of bonus content on there at the time that this episode is being released, and you can support for as little as $1 a month. So that is much appreciated. Everybody save the date. Don't forget my first virtual live show, Saturday, July 13th, 8 p.m. Central. It's going to be on YouTube Live, and I will share that link on my Patreon, on Instagram, etc. So send me your questions, send me your listener stories. I want to answer and read those for you guys then. You all are amazing. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a great week and stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.